In August, when the Louisiana heat made the air thick as syrup, marine archaeologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell led a small research team into the deepest parts of the Atchafalaya Basin. We were tracking Civil War-era shipwrecks, following sonar readings that suggested a large vessel buried in the swamp mud. What we found changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I'm Jake Morrison, a graduate student from Tulane University, and I was part of that expedition. Sarah had been chasing this particular anomaly for 3 years, a massive metallic signature buried 20 feet under centuries of sediment in one of the most remote corners of the bayou. The cypress trees hung over us like cathedral arches, their Spanish moss swaying in the humid breeze. Water moccasins slithered between the roots, and the air buzzed with mosquitoes and the distant cry of herons. It was the kind of place where sound carried strangely, sometimes amplified, sometimes swallowed by the thick vegetation. Our sonar operator, Marcus Chen, was the first to realize what we were looking at wasn't a Civil War gunboat. "Dr. Mitchell," he called out, his voice tight with confusion. "This thing, it's got a cylindrical hull, almost like..." He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Like a submarine." Sarah laughed it off at first. A submarine in the Louisiana bayou made no sense. But as we used water pumps to clear away decades of mud and debris, the unmistakable shape emerged. Curved steel hull, conning tower, what looked like torpedo tubes. The metal was dark with age, but remarkably preserved in the oxygen-poor swamp water. That first night, we camped on a small island of solid ground, about 50 yards from the site. The bayou never really gets quiet. There's always the plop of a jumping fish, the rustle of something moving through the reeds, the distant splash of an alligator. But around midnight, we started hearing something else, a rhythmic tapping, metallic and deliberate, coming from the direction of the submarine. "Probably just the hull settling," Sarah muttered, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes as she stared into the darkness. By the third day, we'd exposed most of the vessel. It was massive, easily 200 feet long, with Cyrillic lettering barely visible on the weathered hull. Soviet Union. The hair on my arm stood up when I made out the faded numbers. K127. Marcus ran the serial number through every database he could access on his satellite internet. What he found made his face go pale. According to Soviet naval records, K127 was lost in the Arctic Ocean in 1962 during a classified mission. All hands presumed dead. We found the main hatch on the third day. The wheel was corroded and stuck, but Marcus managed to rig up a portable winch. As the hatch creaked open for the first time in decades, a rush of frigid air poured out, so cold it formed visible mist in the Louisiana heat. The temperature difference was impossible, like opening a freezer door. Sarah insisted on going in first. I followed with Marcus and our photographer, David Park. We wore full hazmat gear, expecting toxic gases or contamination. What we found was worse. The interior was perfectly preserved, not just preserved, frozen. Ice crystals covered every surface, despite the subtropical climate outside. Our breath fogged in our masks as we moved through the narrow corridors, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. In the control room, we found them. The entire crew still at their stations, frozen solid but not decomposed. Their eyes were open, staring at instruments that somehow still flickered with dim light despite having no power source. Captain Boris Volkov, according to his name tag, sat in the commander's chair like he was still waiting for orders. The strangest part was the logbook. Modern digital equipment that shouldn't have existed in 1962. Sealed in a vacuum container that had kept it functional. When we connected it to David's laptop, the entries appeared in Russian. Sarah's grandfather had been a Soviet immigrant, so she could translate enough to understand. October 15th, 1962. The dimensional breach experiment has succeeded beyond our expectations. We are no longer in Arctic waters. Current location unknown. Instruments show impossible readings. The next entry chilled us more than the frozen air. October 16th. Something followed us through. It knows we're here, sealing all compartments. May God forgive us for what we've opened. That's when Marcus noticed the scratches on the walls, deep gouges in the steel made from the inside. Too regular to be human, too purposeful to be random. They led to a sealed compartment at the rear of the submarine, marked with radiation warnings in 3 languages. We shouldn't have opened it. I know that now. Inside, we found containers holding objects that defied explanation. Geometric shapes that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Crystals that bent light in impossible ways. And in the center, a sphere of black metal that hummed with energy and seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. David was filming everything when it happened. The sphere began to glow, and suddenly, every piece of electronic equipment we had started malfunctioning. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees, and we could hear something moving in the water outside the submarine. We ran, left everything behind, and got back to our boats as fast as we could. But when we reviewed David's footage later, in the final seconds before the camera died, you could see something in the reflection on the sphere's surface. A shadow that didn't belong to any of us, standing right behind David. Within a week, strange things started happening. David's camera equipment would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, filming empty rooms. Marcus began having nightmares about drowning in frozen water. Sarah developed a fever and started speaking in Russian, words she didn't know. Then the men in black suits showed up. No identification, no explanations. They confiscated everything. Our equipment, our notes, our footage. Told us the submarine never existed. Threatened our careers. And worse, if we talked. Marcus died in a car accident 2 months later. The police said he fell asleep at the wheel and drove into Lake Pontchartrain. But I was there when they pulled the car out. The windows were frozen solid from the inside, and there were those same scratches on the interior door panels. David disappeared entirely. His apartment was empty, like he'd never existed. His family stopped returning my calls. Sarah lasted the longest. She managed to hide 1 copy of the digital files before they took everything. But the fever never broke, and eventually, she was found in her apartment, frozen solid despite the August heat. The coroner couldn't explain it. I'm the only one left now. I've changed my name, moved across the country, but every night I dream about that submarine, still sitting in the Louisiana mud. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, I can hear that metallic tapping again, like something is trying to communicate across impossible distances. I kept one thing they didn't find, a single photograph David took of the sphere. If you look closely at the reflection, you can see all of us standing there. But there's something else, something that wasn't there when the picture was taken. A figure in a Soviet naval uniform standing right behind us, with eyes as black as deep water. The thing is, I've been tracking similar disappearances across the country. Scientists, researchers, anyone who gets too close to things that don't belong in our world. The pattern is always the same. Extreme cold, scratches on metal surfaces, and people who simply vanish. I think the submarine wasn't just a vessel, it was a doorway. And something came through that doorway, something that's still out there, still watching, still waiting. If you're listening to this, if you believe any of it, do me a favor. Stay away from the Atchafalaya Basin. Don't go looking for answers you're not prepared to find. Some mysteries are better left buried in the mud. But if you've made it this far, if this story has gotten under your skin the way it has mine, then maybe you understand why I had to tell it. Hit that like button if you believe there are things in this world that science can't explain. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. And leave a comment. Tell me if you've ever encountered something that shouldn't exist. because I'm starting to think I'm not the only survivor out there. And if you're like me, if you've seen things that can't be explained, then maybe together we can figure out what's really happening in the dark corners of our world. Just remember, once you start looking for the truth starts looking back.